But here I am back in the steel rooms in Brig again to do another workshop. We were going to run a plaster one this year again because I was so keen last year, but we haven't quite made the numbers. And then one or two of those have come across, well, they wanted to come last year, they've come across onto the acrylic one I'm going to run now. So I'm just going to film parts of this 4-week day-long acrylic course, giving all the basics of acrylics. I thought you'd like to share that with us, obviously, so you can get the basics hand to hand as they're doing. So let's just run through the stuff we're going to be using before they even come in. The painting I'm going to use for an example is the one I did of the badgers in the wood nearby a couple of years ago, and I've got with me today the ordinary acrylics and heavy body acrylics. So we've got ordinary acrylics here to show the difference between the slightly thinner acrylics and cheaper acrylics and the heavy bodies. I have for sale for them sets of 9 brushes, the filberts, which are these flat rounded ends and rounds, and the square, the flat ends and the rounds. A set of 9 brushes for £20 a piece, long handle. I think that's very reasonable. And we'll discuss the types of hair that's in the nylon and the consistency later. Painting knives with me, spoon for getting the paint out and so on. And even forks for doing texture work, because acrylics are just so versatile. But I've also brought along my watercolour brushes because I want to show that they can be used in such a versatile way, like watercolours or like oils. So I'm going to show them the use on paper as well as on board. So I've got black primed MDF here for them, as well as some watercolour paper, where I can demonstrate the versatility and the use of the acrylics, using it as glazes, using it as washes, using it in pasto and so on. For mixing, they're going to simply be using plastic plates and a jar of water. I have my pre-made stay wet palette just by using a sandwich box and my colours ready to go. Hello. Hello. Again. Again. Right, so we've discussed heavy body paints and the ordinary bodies, the heavy body being literally twice as thick. We can put them on very thickly with a brush or with a painting knife. And remember the difference between painting knives and palette knives. That is a painting knife. A palette knife comes directly off the handle. Forget palette knives because, you know, the painting knife does everything else and your fingers don't touch the canvas. That's the beauty of it. So you can get these in various shapes. One of my favourite shapes is this one. And you can get them in right and left-handed angles. But that one, you see, you've got the flat, you've got that angle, you've got the tip. So that's a very useful one to use. Now, I brought along, this is the set of acrylic brushes I use. It is not wise to use the same brushes for acrylics as for oils, because having used oil paint on a brush, the residue is there, the oil is there, it doesn't take the paint as well. So I do have 2 sets of brushes. In my set of brushes here, I've got the painting knives, I've got spatulas, I have great big trowels at home. I mean, I do paintings up to 9 foot across, and I'm using I use cement trowels and everything for mine. And I just saw one through Saatchi now, which I did literally with a square cement trowel. And the knives and brushes, and sponge rollers as well. We're going to be using sponge rollers in the next few weeks, and they're great fun. People don't realise the versatility of a sponge roller. This is a very small one, which is a watercolour. You can actually make nice textures of watercolour with a sponge like that. We're going to be doing sponge rollers, and they're back again. So my brush is there. You have the choice of buying the brushes if you want. There's an old set there you can use as well. I brought the acrylic brushes today, but I've also brought my watercolour brushes because I want to demonstrate how we can use acrylics as watercolours, and how we can use those techniques combined in the painting we're going to be working from today, like this. You've got MDF board there with a dark primed ground. Now, it's great fun to have a dark ground on your painting, whether it's a canvas or a board. Board is far more longer lasting than canvas. You don't damage it as easily. It's cheaper than buying a canvas. So even the thinner hardboard is good. Remember that we never use the rough side of hardboard. Some amateurs think that's like canvas. It's not. It's actually the reverse of canvas, and it doesn't look nice when it's done. So MDF or hardboard, and I've just given that a coat of black. But it's great fun to also work on coloured grounds. For instance, a red ground is fantastic for doing the green landscape because the red glows through the colours, the greens. It's obviously from the colour circle. So purples or pinks or magentas, there's all sorts of ways we can work. And over the next couple of weeks I'm going to bring some examples of my work to show you, which will literally show you examples of these ways of working. Now today we're doing a very photographic piece. We're going to be working in much more detail. And we're going to work in all sorts of ways over the next few weeks. We're going to be working with slabs of colour, very abstractly. We're going to be using the rollers. But today we're going to pretend that the dawn is just coming and that we're starting in night, and we're going to draw this painting out of the dark. We're going to start with our darkest colours and work forward gradually with techniques, and we finish with our highlights. It's a great way to work, and I often work this way, working out to the highlights. Most of my work is done with the highlights at the end anyway. But you're not then painting with paint. You suddenly find yourself painting with light, as Monet did. The paint becomes, you're actually putting on, and at the end of the painting, it's so exciting because everything just comes to life. You are coating every little surface with sunlight. So we're going to work these out gradually. It looks very complicated, but actually it's not that difficult to do, as long as we build our colours up from darks to lights. We have to understand things about colour intensity, we have to understand things about colour hues. Hue is a lovely fellow, but colour hue means the cool and the warm between the colours. That every colour has the cool, which is a bluer colour, and the warm, which is a more browny yellowy colour. So every single colour. Now, for instance, if I just take this palette here, and I just show you those again, here we've got, let's hope they stay there. That is a cool yellow, it's a lemon yellow. Okay, cool, warm, warmer. Oops, my red's starting to go there, I think I'll get this way around. That is a cool red because it's more purple, and this is a very warm red because it's more orange. This is a warmer blue, this is a cooler blue. It's icy, it's fiery. And that, and going to the purple, will become a warmer blue still. But then, well, what is that? You see, because that would then be a cool red, or it would be a warm blue. It's that in between, isn't it? Every single colour then has a hue. And we need to understand. I'm going to rush you, I'm just explaining it, so don't think I'm going to test you on this and you have to know it all in one go, you don't. Let me get this one right. That's that way. The little bit here has to begin. I will go over things over and over again. You'll gradually get used to them, you'll gradually take them in automatically. And then you can work your colours, as we're going to do today, from the background upwards, leaving that dark colour glowing through those textures and using your acrylics or oil to do that. Remember, you can paint acrylics, oils over acrylics. You cannot paint acrylics over oils. So if you want to do a fast painting out of doors, you can build up your whole background with acrylics, and then you can get the strength that maybe you can't quite get. Because I did a sunflower painting last year out in the fields, and I could not get the vibrancy of yellows, even with the heavy bodies that I wanted. So I went back and I finished it at home with the oils for the bright yellows of the flowers. So we can use the oils over the acrylics, we can't go the way around. So there's so much to do. You can add texture into the paint itself. I could take sand, I could take seeds, grain, rice, mix it with the paint before I actually put it on to the canvas. Which is what I've just done a Scottish one, and I've got all the heather and so on, and I'm building it up with these textures and just stumbling over the surface for the heather tips. If you imagine the rice, if it's a deep purple or red, and then the pink's just going over the top of the rice surface, yeah? There's all this resin. I've got massive pieces like this I've done for Washington Green, in a big London gallery. And I built the whole things up in textures, from polystyrene to beans and peas and everything else. I had fun sending one of the smaller ones to Australia a couple of years ago because the customs were, what the hell is this? You know, they're looking to took it all apart. And can we bring this food in or not? You know, so they let it through in the end. But then I put resin on the top, so we finished the whole thing. And for instance, say it's a Scottish block like this, and it's a seaweed in the front, and I've used wool, and I've soaked the wool in PVA glue and draped it all through. And then we've used acrylics mixing in with that. So we've got all these lovely textures and grains, and then using the knife and my fingers to make the sky, and and then the acrylics onto that, let it all dry off, and then I pour a special resin onto the surface, about that thick. It doesn't go off the canvas. And it gives the water, and you can imagine the wet seaweed, and it really does work. It's cheap stuff. So yeah, there's so many exciting things we can do. Right, so that's the basic introduction, giving you an idea, just whetting your appetite. Quick cup of tea then, before we go on. if I'm demonstrating, I'm working on an easel, but with this smaller work, I'm not going to be able to do that today. Right, you've got a plastic plate. If you want more than one plate, you can have more than one plate. That's what you want to be getting yourselves, and then you're not wasting the plates at all. You can take them away with you. So, just a sandwich box. I just mix on either a tray or, that's just paper towel.
Yeah, and you say there's something on top of the paper towel?
Yeah, you can. I don't, but you can put greaseproof on top to stop it going furry. I've never bothered. That's more for people that like to mix, because you can have either two boxes and mix in the box as well, in which case you want something smoother. But you start mixing on this paper and it all furs up, doesn't it? But I don't. I have a metal tray that I work in, and I have a couple of these like little paint trays where they come down, and I can use the roller in as well. So just a large plate or a metal tray, but that's the most important thing, because the paint will stay wet in that for months. Did you know that you can freeze oil paint as well? No. Yeah. So don't waste your oil paint. Yeah, they wouldn't. Would you think oil paint wouldn't freeze? You can put some cling film around the palette and shove it in the freezer, and you put cling film around first. It's a bit, yes. Otherwise, but yeah, you can actually freeze it. You can do it wet into wet. So say we're going to do a feather, an owl's feather, for instance. Let's just make the shape of the owl, the feather there. Take a little bit of yellow ochre. You can just see what that is. We can drop that wet into wet, just like watercolour. We can get these lovely soft effects, just like, there's no difference to watercolour. And that it's almost transparent, isn't it? We can drop those wet into wet effects in with the tip of the brush. Take a little bit of that dark. I can let that just spread out. We can use the tip of the brush to make the feather effects while it's still wet. And that is what we call controlled accident. This gives us the soft effects of watercolour. That's controlled accident. We can do that on paper, but we can also do exactly the same things on canvas. Because now we can take watercolour a stage further. We can take the acrylics into a watercolour technique onto a canvas. We can use acrylic inks. Now acrylic inks are like acrylics, but they're much stronger than the acrylics. They're very vibrant, and we can use them just like watercolour. Right, I'm going to take this brush now, and we can just, you see how we can get the furry effect with that? That's a very fine one. Let's take a bigger one. I'll come back to what it is in a minute when I remember it. And this is a much bigger brush, so I can make bigger strokes. Equally now, that isn't quite dry yet, but I just want to show you how it works. I can take some light, and we can paint light over dark, and this is the light over the dark there. Look at that lovely furry effect we can get. If we use the finer brush again, I can draw it out. We can blend it in, we can just tickle it. The pressure that you put on is important. I mean, your delicacy of brush stroke. Look at the lovely effects we can get. Also, we can stipple.
How quickly does the paint dry on your brush? Because I always thought it dried so quickly, I had to keep putting it in.
No, you're all right. You've got usually the worst time I had, the hottest place I'd ever painted, and it wasn't Cuba, it wasn't America, it was Switzerland. And I was painting up by the Matterhorn, and the paint was drying on my brush between the palette and the canvas. So we've got all of these different brushes for these different purposes, and we can use them then like watercolour. You can see how we can start to use wet into wet effects in the same way as watercolour. We'd have a job doing that with oils, wouldn't we? Let me see if I can get some sort of texturing going here. But yes, you know, now the thing with texturing is never repeat it. Never do this or you get a pattern. Always twist your, but it's finding a sponge that will give you the texturing you want for the leaves or whatever else. And of course, why are we using these brushes? Now, these are watercolour brushes and I'm using them now on paper. I wouldn't want to be using these on canvas because they'd ruin it. These are, you know, I tend to use synthetic brushes all the time. The synthetic brushes are so good for the money now that to buy expensive sables and so on, it's hardly necessary. But these acrylic brushes that I've shown you, these nylons, they're quite long lasting for the price. And for that money, I mean, I can't beat them. I've looked all over the place. But you don't want a brush. Now, you see, if I let you feel, where are we? Where's one of my mop brushes? My favourite. Here we are. I love these oval mops, Pro Art oval mops. Now, if we use a brush that's too hard, it will actually lift the paint off the surface of the canvas. It's very hard to put paint on. So if we're doing a very textural piece, like I've shown you earlier, with all the seeds and things, then you can use a heavy brush, because a decent brush will be ruined, to brush that in at first, and then use our delicate brushes at the end. If you're working on a smoother surface, then you can use more delicate brushes and do more delicate work. So if I wanted to do a very photographic piece, that's why I've got the board today for you. If I want to do a very impressionist piece or textural piece, I'll change brushes. If the brush is too heavy, you have a job to layer the paint on. It tends to take it off. So let's take a bit of paint deliberately there. And you see how hard that is to actually put it on. It's just not going on. If we use a very soft brush, and I'm going to deliberately use one of my watercolour brushes, it'll just clog up. And it just clogs. I mean, it can do it, it's just clogging, look. So we want a brush that's in between. I'm going to wash that brush straight away because these oval mops are beautiful. Equally though, now I can take that and I could start to blend. The beauty of these heavy bodies, they're much more like oils, aren't they? And that yellow is much, much brighter. Whilst that's still wet, can we do anything? Can we drop in? Let's look and see. Yes, we can. We can get wet into wet effects in a similar way, and then we can paint more heavily as it dries. So we want a brush that is not too hard and will lift the paint off. We want a brush that is stiff enough that will handle the paint, and with our own delicacy of touch as to how well that paint actually goes on. So here's a flat, and this, if you now, I'm just going to let you feel the difference between those. I'm going to dry this off a bit. There we go. Right, you feel the difference between these. I'll pass these round, these three brushes, and then you'll feel the softness of the wash brush here, which is going to go right into the surface of the paper of a watercolour. And the stiffness of this one, which if I use it with watercolour will go over the surface of it. I do use flats and brushes like this watercolour as well for the surface of dry brush work. And then this one, which is great for getting down to the base coats of textural work, but you wouldn't want to use it unless you were just doing large washes or textural work. We were talking about poppies earlier. Now with a filbert, let's take a slightly cooler red here. I'm going to mix some of this magenta, which is a slightly cooler red. And like the Chinese, we can immediately do a brush stroke. So if I wanted a poppy, say, I'll do a couple of poppy petals here. I'm just going to let it go into the edge and let it go into the water to get that lovely soft edge. Just so you can see the difference in these. So we can do poppy shapes. Straight away you've got a rounded edge. If I was using the flat brush, I'm going to be getting into trouble there because I can do it, but it's not. I've got to then, it's a flatter edge. So you've got to choose your horses for course starting. So I'm going to put this to one side. There's bits of paper here for you to play with. That's it. Yep, thanks. I'll leave these bits of paper here. So if you want to play with these anytime, they're there for you to share. And just try my different brushes out if you want. I'll put those back in there just for the moment. Now, how are we going to build up? How much paper do you need? That's another thing. It's hard to say because how many of these colours you're going to want straight off. A little bit of black might be useful in case you want to blend in, but I wouldn't bother with the black at all. I would have the Prussian blue. You're going to need, at this stage, you're really working with the various greens, aren't you? So you're going to need yellow ochre, you're going to need a couple of these greens, all over there. If they're in these big pots, there's a teaspoon here. It's a bit of a devil, but I suggest you share a bit. So when somebody goes for a pot, go around and give somebody a little bit of each. And you get it off the spoon with your finger and wash your hands out there. So that's a spoon for the pots. The other ones squeeze out quite readily. Wonderful for clouds and skies. And you would never think of adding those two to make a grey. So what are those two colours?
Viridian
green.
Viridian green.
And the alizarin crimson. Very useful colours. I'm evil at times, I'll just panic. But well done. You get a gold star today. Right, let's have a look how we're going to build up this painting.
Colours.
Excellent.
I love mixing colours.
Oh, yeah, I mean, when you get something like that, it's like sweeties.
There's also that lady that we went to in Wales. Payne's Grey.
Yes.
And yellow ochre makes the lovely sap green.
Yeah. Yes, so black.
You wouldn't think.
Now, what's happening there is, you see, Payne's Grey has black in it, and black will actually make a green. Black and yellow will give you a green, although black does go sweeting. Right, I'm going to start this painting with the background here. So I'm going to probably do most of this with a filbert. First of all, this one, something like that size will be fine. The new brushes have gum on them, so first of all,
I'm going to have to write down.
Whatever, you know, ask me again, there's plenty of time, we've got a couple of weeks, except some...
I think you remember. It goes up in
Yeah,
12 next week.
Come as long as you can. I mean, if you come part of the day, I mean, yeah, I mean, as I say, we'll try and make up some time at the end, or I mean, if you get on quick enough today, maybe we'll have a quick go at, on a bit of paper at one of the poppies, if you like, just to show you what we do, yeah? Won't let you down, always look after you. So we'll have a quick go at poppies before you go, if you want. Right, so now look at this brush, how we can make the marks here. You see, we've almost got a leaf shape there. These marks are almost straight away, aren't they? These little marks, the tip of the brush.
I'm sorry, is that a filbert you...
This is a filbert, yeah.
Yes.
So we've got our brush marks that way, we've got the fine marks that way, and we've got these marks that way, without having to use a small brush at all at the moment. Here now I want to do fairly large work. So I'm going to start with my lights onto the dark here. When you mix light colours, always mix the white first. In a landscape, traditionally, I start with the horizon, because it's about the mid-tone. So I'm starting with the horizon here at the mid-tone. And if I just paint, see there's a dark tree there, if I paint that in and leave that dark tree behind, I've already got a tree. Now I can use this thickly or thinly. We can use the black to give us some tonal work. I can use this thinner. And look at the effect of light that gives me again. It takes, you see how that black disappears then? Gradually working, we're getting this effect here of wet next to wet. The paint's wet into wet, so I'm just painting it softly and blurredly into here. If I want a sharper edge, I'm going to have to paint this over this when it's dry. At the moment, like watercolour, I'm painting wet next to wet and wet into wet. Go a little bit stronger with that green. Take some lemon yellow again and a little bit of the emerald green. And now I'm going to start working that softly into there. We start bringing the sunlight up. So you see the soft effect we're getting for the background. And then some of those grasses are catching the sunlight, so I'm going to go a bit stronger again.
So you're not really worrying about how much black there is behind, or spaces where the black is?
I'm not even being exact with my... I'm just using it. It's an impression. I'm just using this as a basis for my painting. And gradually building it up and up and up, and the darks in between, until I come to the very end. I mean, you would have been building this up right the way across. I'm just building a line down.
You're going to need a lot of patience, I feel.
in this particular
I'm not convinced
case,
I've got the patience for that.
with this, no, well, you just do it. It just flows. In this case,
because
we're
there's a lot of detail, isn't there? There's
a
lot of small
we're
strokes.
starting with. It's a bit fiddly. We're starting with, but it's quite a quick look. We're starting with a very detailed technique.
Yeah.
We're starting with a photographic technique, but we're going to go on to much looser ones later. So there's a bit more white into this, and it's going to almost disappear back into the black. That's why I say it almost disappears back into the dark. But you're going to do these darks first and gradually bring the lights forward. So you coat your whole, do the sky first, I suggest. Come down, do the whole of your first layers of darker background, soft, wet into wet, gradually getting sharper and sharper. But this sort of warm grey going down the hair here, letting it just thin down at the edges. So light against dark, warm against cool, and our hair is just starting to appear in there. And go darker in there with finer details later. Let that just dry off a bit. Then I'm going to come back in with a finer brush to do more detail afterwards behind it. The beauty of acrylics is you can go both ways round. There's nothing.
So he doesn't look stuck on sort of thing, or he doesn't look painted round.
That's right. you adjust it as you want.
So round to create a that squeezes out.
I've got some of those.
Just don't be tempted to paint too many of the blacks out. As I say, leave quite a bit of texture in between gradually as it builds up. And if you use the paint thinner, it goes on like a glaze. And as you get lighter and lighter as you build up the colours, then you use the paint thicker and thicker. Right, now I'm going to go down across to this magenta here, which is a sort of blue magenta mix. Now you could do that with that. I could use some of this red, and I might well do in a minute. But let's just bring that into the background here, and look how that suddenly brings, because it's warmer against the cool, it makes the blues seem bluer. A lady who knows, she knows her herbs, as the Americans say. Why they've got to say herb? I mean, they're like French. I mean, the French say it, but why should we? L'herbe. And they don't say les herbes, it's l'herbe for a single plant anyway still. So. In that, yeah. We start on the animals in a minute, eh?
Yes, I am. I'm nearly finished.
Now I could use the tip of the brush, I could use a small brush, but we were talking earlier about using rakes. So let's just, I've got all my basic texture going on in the background here. It's the tip of the brush to flick it in, all water that's starting to dry now. And while it's still just tacky, oh it does, it soaks right in very quickly, yeah. Put a purple there, bit of blue. These paints are starting to dry out of here now. That's a nice dark. And we will take what I have just shut up. Rake. So we can use the rake, or we could use a fine brush. I'm just going to use a rake for the moment.
That's easier.
Oh yeah. As long as we don't get it being a pattern, that's the worry. I've got to see I can drag the wet paint through itself as well. And that will be a bit different on a canvas because we're getting a different effect on the canvas. And as it goes back, the strokes become shorter. So as I come down from here, short strokes here, and I come back with light strokes over it in a minute. So yes, I'd want to come down to a finer, because I don't just want hairy texture now. I do need definite lines of. Oh yes, just delicacy, just the tickling in of colours. You see, it's quite effective, isn't it? And hopefully now, can you begin to see the sky? You can. I mean, I can work on it, but now I've got all the colouring. The white is the pain in the arse. This is the beauty now. We want to really be whacking on the colour. I mean, look at that, you know. If you don't do it thick, the bees are going to show through anyway. So we go right up into here. And now the sky works even more because the more colour, the correct colours you get, the more balance it gets together. Now you can see me playing it to bring the other colours out. It's enhancing. And the darks in the centre, they're too light. We're missing some important things here. So we need to get, before I look at that tree, purple for a start. I've used that brush, it's still solid. And I can bring that into the tree as well. I'm using a smaller brush, I'm using too big a brush, but you just get the idea. Okay, we'll have a look at that from a distance and just see what that does.
I'm going to check my fox out, because I'm going to go to do them anyway.
Well, yeah.
Vibrant, lovely painting. Very good. So we've got some lovely work today, and if we come to all of you. So it looks like you've really enjoyed the course today. You mentioned that you were amazed when you stood back from your work. You didn't believe it was yours.
No,
Is that because it was so bad or so good?
I was surprised. I think I was surprised that it had come together in the way that it did in the end. You know, it looked like a lot of just marks on the paper to start on the card to start with, and now it created a whole at a distance, which I really like.
Yes, it's really good, isn't it? So you're happy with yours today.
Yeah.
So this is the first of our 4. Next week
I don't
is...
think it's finished, but I feel like it was right to stop.
Oh yes, yes, this is good to know. And how do you get on with yours, you feel?
It's beneath.
And you've enjoyed it?
Yeah, I did enjoy it, yeah. I haven't done all that much acrylic painting, and I've achieved, I think, what I hoped to today, and that was actually to get a painting finished.
And you have it. Lovely light in it. And the thing is how they're all different, aren't they? The same photograph, but we've all got such individual pieces of work that are about the painters. And yourself? Because you were with me last year on pastels, so this is something quite different for you.
It is quite different, and having attempted oils in the summer and not got on very well, I'm very pleased with this.
Excellent.
I just need to learn quite a bit about using the brush properly.
It's brush skills as well. Now you've done really well. And now...
I'm Pat. I've found this a different technique because I'm a watercolourist, really. And so I'm very surprised, actually, that I've managed to produce something that's reasonable.
It went very nice. And in one day, your first ever. Well done. And finally...
I've enjoyed today. I wanted to learn more about the mediums, so
Thank you very much for coming, ladies. And we've got 3 more weeks to go and lots more fun to have. And it has been fun, hasn't it?
yes, definitely.
Right.